Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we had Dana White's Contender series. That takes place for me here in Australia at about 10 in the morning usually, which is perfect. And recently there's been a lot of Australian/New Zealand guys coming through in that organisation. Last week, Navajo Sterling, who looks really talented and really complete for a light heavyweight, earned himself a contract in devastating fashion. He's a guy to really keep your eye on. Today we had Aaron Tao in the main event. Craziest face tattoos. He had a really close, well-contested fight with a guy named Elijah Smith, who's also a really actually young talent, up-and-coming prospect. And it was interesting, the judges really favoured the control time. He was quite active with maybe he had a couple of submissions attempts on Tao. But you could see in the third round, Tao was just putting it on him with the strikes, pushing the pace. If you're looking at the rules, that's the sort of thing that is actually scored and taken into account. Damage is the number one. So yeah, Aaron Tao, unfortunate not to get the nod, I thought, in a really close fight. But he'll be back. That's his first loss as a professional. But yeah, like I said, there's just been crazy talent coming through on the Dana White's Contender series. If you compare what was coming through on season 1 even of the Contender series to now, it's a different ball game, which just shows you how quickly the sport's moving and evolving. Even from Australia, like Australia isn't necessarily known for generating a lot of top level talent, but look how many guys we have in the UFC now. Over the last few weeks, Quaylen Salkild and Cody Haddon, two teammates from Perth, they just got in as well. And these guys have been tearing apart the local regional scene in Australia. And it was clear that they were ready to move on to the next step. So if you look at Australia and this region of the world, like I said with New Zealand as well, the sort of talent that's coming through, it just goes to show you that you don't actually need to move to America or go take your career international to have a big impact and have lots of success. And I think Volkanovski was a guy that proved that, who lives just 20 minutes down the road from me, in a small little surfing town, fishing town, that's the last place you would expect as dominant of a world champion as he was. The thing I want to circle back to is the judging and how they're favouring control time. There was another fight earlier today, Benjamin Bennett, who's, had a really long, pretty decorated amateur career and is sort of fresh into his pro career now. But he took on a guy called Joey Hart, who you could tell instantly was more complete on the feet, the better striker, and was letting his hands go more. Although Bennett had some control and some takedowns over the first 2 rounds, there was literally no damage, no submission attempts. And like I said, when you look at the scoring criteria, the number one thing to score is damage. So, I probably would have given all 3 rounds to Joey Hart based on him landing the more damaging strikes, even though he got controlled for such a long period. So yeah, consistency of judging is a whole other conversation. Like I said, this is a very fresh sport and we're still judging based off the 10-point boxing must system, which doesn't really necessarily work so well for MMA. And I think that today, the judging across the couple of the fights in that Contender series goes to show you that there's something that needs to shift there, because the rules state different from what the judges are favouring still. Dana White's Contender series has been super exciting to watch, and has been producing absolute killers. And it's a really good opportunity to see these guys get tested against another young prospect before they get into the UFC. Having a bit of the context surrounding these guys when they enter the UFC is also really helpful because, as you know, the UFC is like such a bloated product now with over 500 fighters that are coming and going constantly, so that they can fill up the events and make sure that they're putting on as many events a year as they're contractually obligated to. So watching the Contender series, having a little bit of an understanding about who's coming in, I always find super fun. And like I said, the fights are always really entertaining. You saw one of the best women's knockouts, I think, of all time a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. Another fun event. Unlucky for Aaron Tao, the Kiwi, not to get the decision. Like I said, I'm sure he'll be back. He's got a great team. He trains with absolute savages, so I'm sure he'll be very well prepared for whatever's next. Sean O'Malley has come out after his fight with Merab and said he has a torn labrum. His labrum in his left hip, I believe, is torn and will need surgery, which is not a necessarily very devastating surgery. Well, it can be. You see with Poirier the effects it's had on his career. So yeah, O'Malley's going to be out for a little bit, and it's probably the worst. It depends. With how fast the sport's moving, he has really good habits, and I know he's always training and always getting better. So even if he has to have a few months off, maybe it actually isn't going to be the worst thing for his career. Reassess, come back, and look forward. But yeah, with all of that being said, for him to have to get surgery, still really young, and I'd almost say creeping into the prime of his career, it's never good. So I think it happened 10 weeks ago as well. So it's interesting to see. It's interesting to think about how much that could have impacted his training camp leading into that fight, especially with how much wrestling he would have had to be doing. Kevin Lee has been looking for a fight now. He says for the last, few months. Another guy who's coming off a lot of surgeries, another knee surgery, I believe, and he's looking to bounce back and make another run. He's really creeping up in age, and I think we've already seen the best of Kevin Lee, but just announced he has got himself a promotion. He's signed to Gamebred FC, which is Jorge Masvidal's bare knuckle MMA promotion. Yeah, that's going to be a tough watch. As a fan of Kevin Lee and a fan of someone who's always put on really entertaining fights in the UFC at the top level, and then was just absolutely destroyed by injuries. Those knee reconstructions just take so much out of you, not only from a physical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint. To maintain the mentality that those guys have, especially through some knee injuries, is really full on. So Dominic Cruz has talked about how tough that is. You've seen the impact that had on his career. Kevin Lee now making another run of things, which will be really interesting to see who he's matched up against, because he hasn't got a matchup yet. I'm not expecting it's going to be someone super top tier. You saw his fight against Diego Sanchez in Eagle FC. I don't know where that is anymore. But yeah, you saw his fight with Diego Sanchez in Eagle FC, and it was just, it was, like I said, it was a really tough watch. I think if Kevin Lee's competing anywhere but the UFC, it's a shame. Then with that all being said, that's not for me to be with that all being said, that's not for me to say. Kevin Lee obviously still wants to compete, is still hungry, and maybe him, if he can perform well in this fight on Game Red FC, it might catapult him back up to some of the bigger promotions where he wants to be. Because if he's been looking for a fight for the last few months, like he says he has, and this is the best thing that's come across the table, then I don't know. That doesn't really seem like the prospects are all that bright, to be honest. Because I don't know. I can't imagine that this is the number one priority or the first choice that he would have. But you never know. Maybe he wants to give the whole bare knuckle thing a go. You can see a lot of fighters are really intrigued by that, taking off the gloves and making it a more raw combat experience. So maybe that's something he's after as well, but I don't think so. I think he's going to be shooting as soon as the fight starts. But yeah, with that all being said, I'm looking forward to Kevin Lee coming back to some form of competition. It was a really wild headline to see that he's ended up here, but nonetheless, here we are. Another matchup that's just been announced that I want to talk about is Tatiana Suarez versus Verna Jandiroba. Definitely a title eliminator at strawweight, which is, quite an exciting division these days. And this fight, I think, is going to be quite interesting because it's Tatiana Suarez, again, someone who was riddled by injuries, finally found her groove and has found some consistency. And this is going to be a really tough matchup, I think, because Jandiroba's been on a real hot streak. So yeah, that's going to be a really interesting fight. UFC 310, that one's booked for. Looking forward to seeing what happens. There's no UFC this weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing Joshua versus Dubois. Anthony Joshua coming back after his devastating knockout of Francis Ngannou. He's been in a real hot form recently. He went through a real tough period with the Usyk fights, and just a couple of performances after that where he looked real flat. But he's found some good form. This is at Wembley Stadium, I believe, another Riyadh season card. God, they're just throwing money all over the place. Especially in the boxing, This is an all-English card pretty much the whole way down with some pretty good young talent. Daniel Dubois, he's an interesting guy at heavyweight because he has some really good wins. But his style is like, maybe it's not the most exciting. He's a bit of a lumberer. He was TKO'd by Joe Joyce due to the eye injury. When he stepped up to the higher level against Usyk, he was put away and hurt. But with all that being said, I'm going to watch the fight and I'm excited for it nonetheless. I think with two huge punches like this, Joshua obviously has the heavier hands. He's a heavy puncher. But with that being said, if either of these two guys land, I think it can be dangerous. So with no UFC, this is about the next best thing. So I'll be illegally streaming that one. There's a good chance of that happening. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Brief one today, but thank you again. I look forward to talking again soon.